Welcome to UX Evolved. I'm Eric Ellis. Every profession tells itself a story about what it is and why it matters. And for the last few years, we in UX have been watching that story get rewritten in real time, sometimes by us, sometimes for us, and increasingly by machines that have read everything we've ever published and drawn their own conclusions. My guest today isn't a designer. He's not a product manager or an engineer. He's a media scholar, a former broadcast journalist, and a documentary filmmaker. Sports media has quite literally been reshaped by automation, and AI continues that evolution. Dr. Travis Bell is an associate professor of digital and sports media and director of graduate programs and research at the Zimmerman School of Advertising and Mass Communications at the University of South Florida. He spent 12 years in broadcast journalism before stepping back to study the industry he came from. His research sits at the intersection of media framing, identity, and sport. And if you think that has nothing to do with design, stay with me. Because what Travis is describing in media, the automation of craft, the fragmentation of sources, the one-person band returning under a different name, the concern that AI is pulling from a biased aggregate of history and calling it truth, that is UX conversation, word for word. We talk about what it means to frame a story, who makes those decisions, and what happens when those decisions get handed to an algorithm. We talk about teaching the next generation of practitioners how to ask better questions, not just get faster answers. And we end up somewhere I didn't expect, at the question of what it means to be human in a profession that AI is perfectly capable of mimicking, but not yet capable of understanding. Travis closes out season 1 of UX Evolved, and there's no better way to land this season than with a conversation about craft, framing, and the stories we choose to tell. Let's get to it. Travis, welcome to UX Evolved. Dr. Travis Bell, how are you? Welcome to UX Evolved.
I'm fantastic. How are you doing, Eric?
We go back a ways from our days at the Florida State University. I want to go ahead and put the in there. Ohio State does it, but we have it. It's on the plaque. If you drive down Tennessee Street, it says the word the on the plaque.
Yeah, we can certainly claim at least within the state of Florida. So that's really all that matters.
That's right. Associate Professor of Digital and Sports Media, Director of Graduate Programs and Research in the Zimmerman School of Advertising and Mass Communications at the University, can I say that? The University of South Florida, and 12 years as a broadcast media journalist. And you are a documentary filmmaker. And I love this. I rarely get an opportunity to speak with like-minded folks outside of the kind of the SaaS and design profession. So I thought take a little left turn on this episode and maybe start by telling us a little about yourself. Who are you, Dr. Bell?
Sure. Maybe it's because we're both left-handed, therefore we can definitely take a left turn.
That's right.
Makes another sense.
It's natural.
Yeah, I still teach broadcast media. Just finished teaching a documentary filmmaking production course this past semester in our graduate program. I oversee the theory course. I just taught an audience analysis class to think about social listening and how we might engage research in that particular space around an array of topics. So in the kind of academic sphere, I've always been pegged as the sports guy. I would peg myself more as the sports media guy, both as the practitioner and the researcher. A lot of what I do right now builds on my broadcast career and my training in that space in terms of storytelling and how that works and how that might influence public understanding about any relevant topic within the sport media sphere.
There are very few humanistic aspects of what I do on my side that I think is really difficult for AI to copy very well, at least not right now. And storytelling is certainly one of them. And you and I both have coalesced in that space. But your research is sitting at a lot of intersections. You work both as a practitioner and a researcher. And I want to talk about that the evolution of your space, and maybe find some parallels that you are seeing that perhaps we are seeing in user experience and software. Now, you've lived two different lives, it seems. Like you've lived 12 years in broadcasting. We weren't in Florida at the time. I didn't get a chance to catch your broadcasts.
You didn't miss much.
Oh, okay. All right. And now as a researcher studying it from the outside. So what made you take that step back? Why take the step back from the craft you were in and start studying it?
Yeah, well, I think the nice thing was the initial transition from broadcast to teaching started with the opportunity to still teach the craft, right? I didn't have my PhD yet when I left local news and started teaching at USF. So I didn't have the research side of the job initially. So when I made that transition, I was the TV practitioner coming in
Right.
to teach television, teach video reporting, journalistic standards, editing, lighting, all of the kind of traditional production aspects of video storytelling that I started, I think, diving into my coursework and really taking a step back and looking at kind of the media enterprise as a whole and wanting to understand how a lot of these systems work and how they impact or reinforce storytelling and how the public understands things. And then now I would say my work is definitely split 50-50 between research and teaching. Still, there's a lot of value in, I think, creative quality visual storytelling
Yeah.
and good production aesthetics and fact checking of information and everything that goes into good storytelling. I think the integration of the classroom side and the research now engaging and intercepting and forming the way that I teach.
That's amazing because I we see the same thing over here. That in fact, I want to bring up a topic that perhaps is a I don't know. It's a narrative that is all around automation and automation of craft. And I often find that things that can be done easily, especially as AI inserts itself, dare I say, the wisdom in me always kind of makes me want to question the output. And I see that as those coming up into our world who don't have that wisdom yet automatically accept that what they get in their prompt response from Claude or wherever automatically assume that's true and right and just and the way to go. So let's maybe take that position of automation of craft in your world and apply it to sports. Sports recaps, they've been around for a long time. They've been around before AI was AI. The Associated Press was automating game summaries before people even knew what a LLM was. What happened though to those journalists? What happened to those who used to write those stories? Because some of the things that we're experiencing in software today predated or came before us in your world.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting, right? I was just at the National Association Broadcasters Conference last month in Las Vegas, right? The amount of green screen and automation of fake desks that come up out of the floor that people are working around. It offers, I think, some interesting developments and potential advancements in the production quality or the utility of it. So it's not to say it's all bad, right? Your example about the game recaps.
Yeah.
For so long, pre-AI, pre-internet, the newspaper was where you got the game recap. And you occasionally got some highlights on the local news broadcast. I mean, I'm a huge Cubs fan. I can follow every aspect of a game that's going on if I'm not watching it live, which I still watch a lot live. But you can engage with and follow. You can have a text alert and immediately know what happened, and an AI automated summary, if it's accurately programmed, can spit out some helpful information to summarize what's going on. I think it's offered an opportunity for different types of storytelling because so much of the traditional game recap was about the journalist doing the deep dive into trying to find the interesting angle, the last minute play, what was the humanistic part of things.
I was
Right,
going to
even when
actually ask you
social,
that question was like, did the automation of the production side ultimately influence the big J, like the actual storytelling moment? Because what's resonating, what I'm seeing is that I don't know about you, but turning on ESPN, I still get people reading me stats for the sake of stats. And I'm thinking to myself, why am I listening to something I can get on my phone? And maybe that's just bad translation. It's not there yet. Like the ability to tell more stories, richer stories is there. But whether it's actually happening at ESPN or anywhere else, maybe not. I'm knocking ESPN, but you get what I'm saying.
yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is the devaluation of the game story is not necessarily because there's not interest in reading about the game you watched, but it's if we're incorporating automation into the writing of that, so much is already consumed in real time
Mm,
of the game, whether it's through a social platform, whether it's someone actually watching the game on television if there's second screen. As heavy as sport has become and reliant on analytics, and I think how that stuff translates into dialogue through media, I think is really interesting because now there's the reliance on not the traditional sports stats that you and I grew up, right? Completion percentage for a quarterback, shooting percentage for a basketball player, right? It's wins against replacement for a baseball player. It's the yards after contact in football, right? There's these other sort of metrics that come into play
Yeah.
that I think are really fascinating that have offered this different type of engagement. And that's why there's so many websites that are devoted to these valuation, translations, even like return on investment for salaries of players being translated statistically into trying to figure out like, well, which team is the best team, and using analytics and that being the mathematical argument now rather than just the eyeball test and go, well, that's why they won or lost. Oh no, actually, here's the y equals mx plus b that's going to tell algebra solution.
You give that to someone like Shaquille O'Neal and during the NCAA tournament, and all of a sudden Shaquille O'Neal sounds really smart. But I get what
But he
you.
did just get his master's degree, so
That's right, his honorary master's where he shut
yeah.
down Barkley. Tell me about that from a teaching standpoint then. So you have these up and comers in a world where, let's be honest, the sports media has lost a lot of jobs and there are a lot of outlets that are consolidating or going out of business. You've got layoffs at ESPN, local stations got it, newspapers eliminating entire sports desks. And then you've got this backdrop of AI and automation. How do you teach? What are you teaching now? How do you get a group of, I'm new, but I love sports and I can write well, and coming up into USF, do you factor this massive transformation of the industry into the way that you teach and what you teach and how you teach?
I think I have to. I'll be teaching a whatever we call this, multimedia sports reporting class in the fall semester coming up. And I'm toying with a lot of ideas on how to reshape that class. A different faculty member taught it the last 2 years. I had taught it several iterations of it, but it's been a few years. That's your question is what I'm going to be looking toward for the fall and trying to figure out what matters most in that space. I do think there are a lot of jobs in analytics, but I think analytics can be utilized in multiple ways, right? It's in the writing of or the journalistic recounting of things. But I think if students are really interested in audience metrics and what drives conversations, I think that's an important skill for anyone who wants to go into the sport field itself, right? Because there's so much opportunity for engagement. There's an oversaturation of information still available because every team, every sport, every league, everybody has their own storytelling avenue that's producing content. So I think there are still a lot of jobs out there for storytelling because there's such a multimodal consumption and do so much.
Yeah.
And automation can help with some things, but you still need the content generated and produced and created to engage with audiences. But what are the questions that you're asking to try to get the information to find the story that you're trying to tell?
In that sense, and I didn't graduate with a journalism background, but I started my LSU time in journalism. And all of the words that you just used, I remember my first mass media journalism professor saying. So in a weird way, like the fundamentals of being really good at your job are still there. And I reject the premise that that because of AI, you have to be the top 1% to get a job. I think you have to be taught a new paradigm of how to do your craft. And I think that's scaring the hell out of people. In fact, it's interesting. This anxiety is certainly not confined to our age. This spring, we watched something happen at college commencements across the country that I think is genuinely telling. Graduates who had just spent years and a lot of money preparing for their careers were booing speakers who brought up AI. University of Arizona was probably the one that got the most press. Eric Schmidt was telling tens of thousands of graduates that AI would touch every profession, every relationship, every aspect of their lives. He's not wrong, but the stadium booed him. And wouldn't you, if you were 22 years old and all of a sudden your job prospects went to zero or near zero, and it is backed by facts. Harvard Kennedy School found that 70% of college students see AI as a direct threat. The unemployment rate for graduates, 22 to 27, is at the highest point in over 10 years. I really feel for them. I started my own web career in the middle of the dot-com bust, but this feels even different. It feels like almost like a failure of framing. So I don't know framing I didn't get that far into journalism to really know what framing was. So I think that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, is where your work becomes really relevant in this narrative that seems like two generations of people are talking at each other or past each other. So your research centers on media framing. Before we go any further, I need to understand, what does it mean to frame a story? And can you give me some examples of that? It could be sports, it could be anywhere.
Yeah. So in media framing, the very simplistic explanation that I can think of is framing is broken down into sort of three pieces. It's selection, salience, and omission. So when we're talking about how media frame a story or a content, or let's just say the NBA finals, right? Or the NBA Eastern Conference finals that just finished with the Knicks and the Cavs, right? The Knicks swept the Cavs. So if we're thinking of selection and salience, right, over time, it becomes what are the storylines, which narratives are being talked about the most, how often is that particular thing being repeated? So is the repetition about the Knicks or continuation to try to evolve, return to the NBA finals? So is that the narrative that's driving the conversation, or is it how overwhelming they've been in these playoffs, right? It's sort of the selection of the storylines that go into, and then the salient feature or resonant quality in which that gets repeated and over, that public now say, oh, did you see that the Knicks did XYZ? And that becomes the topic of conversation, right? The old school water cooler thing. You're like, oh, look, I read this. Oh, you read the same thing. Oh, good. Now we're on the same page, right? Where I'm really interested a lot of times in framing is what's being omitted from the conversation, right? And how are things being pushed aside by not being included in the overall discussion? So from a media framing standpoint, when people are studying media framing like I do, kind of starts at that root of selection, salience, and omission. But a lot of that dovetails from the idea of agenda setting, which was always in the political communication sphere around election cycles, predictions. How are people talking about the most salient thing that's important to the public for voting on a given year, right? And which candidate A is really embedded in this space, whereas candidate B is opposed and has this particular stance, right? So the agenda setting, the more that it works downhill over time, the framing then becomes those sort of smaller nuggets of information that build and percolate or support that previous agenda. So there's that first level framing that's referred to as agenda setting, and then second level framing is those selection, salience, and omission of any sort of content that's being created and aggregated over time that create meaning in some way.
In your world, who makes those framing decisions? When I watch a game broadcast and the camera lingers on one player's reaction, or a commentator uses a particular words. I love, you mentioned yaks, yards after catch. Like I remember John Madden calling them yaks. And that
Yes.
was 20 years ago. And nobody
Yep.
really gave him, like it was just a thing that it was like almost like if memes were around back then, John Madden would have been a yak meme. And now it's like
Sure.
yards after catch is like this statistically significant thing that people talk about a lot, and becomes this, like you said, a frame or a narrative that speaks to why the Eagles are going to go all the way in the NFC. Is that a conscious editorial choice? Is it, or is it something more structural than that? I'm going to leave politics out of this, but from a broadcast perspective, is that, how conscious is that?
Now, what's interesting is there's been a lot of framing studies about the production aesthetics of the Olympics, which is unique because there's so many sports going on. There's so many different angles and avenues that are happening. And a lot of the kind of historical Olympic framing studies have looked at both kind of gender distribution of content to figure out, how equitable is media representation on the broadcast side. But then there's also been the aesthetics of how much are they focusing on the individual sort of female body in certain events, right? Gymnastics, beach volleyball, figure skating have a certain aesthetic appeal that has been critiqued for framing things that probably shouldn't be. right? Overemphasizing the female body in production, I think broadcast productions versus other masculine features within various sports. Andy Billings at the University of Alabama, one of the lead people in the Olympic research space. Shout out to him. So I think there's some really interesting dynamics that have been critiqued over time that have helped reshape the way that broadcast production is created. Beach volleyball, I think, is one of the very drivers in its rise in ratings, right? Was that rise in ratings because of an over sexualization of the camera images that are being used or presented versus are we just showing the same athleticism for men's and women's beach volleyball, right? And a lot of people don't even know that men's beach volleyball even exists. Well, the Olympics and NBC maybe aren't going to show that because there's this sort of long-term social acceptance or desire to watch women's beach volleyball. So that's like a broader sort of framing societal thing. Going back to your question about who makes the framing decisions and that aspect of the network down versus others on the individual story, the journalist up, that make the individual decisions about how things are written. And then it goes through multiple layers of revisions and editing to figure out what's the most authentic, accurate composite story that you can try to tell.
That's interesting because that part of it seems like could be, you could throw AI at that and say, look, from a top-down perspective, from a bottoms-up perspective, we have all of this data and media assets in a data lake, and AI actually goes to influence those decisions. What's actually going to be now, and from a live perspective, maybe that's a little different, but from a standpoint of what's going to be continually reported, what is that one metric or what is that one clip that's going to be repeated over and over again on your Instagram feed?
Yeah.
Do you see that happening? Is there a world where those framing decisions could be influenced by AI?
I think they could be influenced. I think more importantly, and I don't want to say concerning, maybe concerning is a little too harsh, but it's an aggregate of the available information that's there for AI to pull from. Right. And so I have an example for you where you're a football fan, right?
Sure.
You know, how would you describe a pro style quarterback?
Pocket. Physique wise, he's going to be tall and big. No one's going to be asking them to doing a lot of moving around or he's going to get his head blown off.
Okay. How would you describe a dual threat quarterback?
Almost the inverse. Mobile, maybe sidearms it a little bit, able to escape penetration easily, high propensity for injury.
Okay. Who's your first example you think of when you think of pro style?
I'm going to go old school. I'm going to say an Aaron Rodgers, perhaps. And then dual threat is what you're going to ask me next. I'm going to say Cam Newton.
Okay. So what's interesting is, so research that I've done looked at 20 years of content for the recruiting website 24/7 Sports. And I'll try to keep this as simple as I can. So 24/7 Sports is this database that offers star values for players, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars. And then the quarterback position for 20 years from 2001 to 2020, it was split into a pro style and a dual threat quarterback perspective. And I can tell you that over 4,000 quarterbacks over those 20 years, 2/3 of the overall quarterbacks were categorized as pro style. Let's just say 2,700 approximately. 85% of those were white versus dual threat, which is the other 1/3 of the overall quarterback population, was about 55% black. And so what's interesting, the reason why I bring this example up is if I put into Google just to search, or I put into ChatGPT, describe the quarterback, the pro style quarterback, it would follow some of the very descriptions that you have, right? High intellect, high IQ, tall, pocket passer, generally not very mobile. And what was interesting when I ran that through ChatGPT just for fun, I then said, produce me an image of a pro style quarterback. And it produced the blonde haired, California looking surfer, white guy. And then I ran the same thing through ChatGPT and asked to describe a dual threat quarterback and characteristics. And then I said, produce an image, and it gave me a square jawed black man, right? And so when I think of the
Which,
concern,
by the way, is what I just did to you. I literally said Aaron Rodgers and Cam Newton. Oh my
well,
gosh.
I'm not picking on you, right? But that's the way in which media and information circulate over time that help co-construct this image or frame an image for us in the way that we might see something. That's where my research is really fascinated, and that's where I do see concern about AI, is because it is just pulling from the available information that can be aggregated to spit something out for me. And so if that's the depiction that I start to see, that's where I start to see, I think, issues of that intersection of AI and sports media information that could be really harmful in the way that it influences someone's identity.
100%. There is a gentleman in the world that agrees with you 100%, and you're in good company because his name is Pope Leo the 14th. Do you know that you're in good company with Pope Leo the 14th? There you go.
I feel a little higher power now. Thank you.
He's just released his first encyclical since he's been Pope, and it was entirely focused on AI, which was really fascinating. And what struck me wasn't just the moral and the spiritual argument of what he was making, but it was a diagnosis. And he said that the challenge that AI poses is it's not just technological, it's anthropological, it's human centered. That the real question isn't what AI can do, it's what is our understanding of what it means to be human. It's questioning our own humanity. I think back at those boos from in Arizona or anywhere else, and I wonder if those boos are not just about I can't find a job, but it's I don't know my place in the world right now, as many others don't either. Whether you're in design, whether you're in finance, whether you're in academia, whether you're in sports broadcasting. And he was talking about framing. He's the sitting pope, and he's essentially making a media framing argument about technology on a global stage. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna ask you to apply your researcher lens to this. How AI is being framed for professionals, specifically professionals like me, like user experience professionals who do a lot of storytelling. We do a lot of use case development. We go down in the weeds of every step to find those anthropological, humanistic moments along the way. If you were teaching designers, much like the way that you're teaching journalists, what would you be telling designers to be like asking for or applying their craft that perhaps they're not doing today, but that AI will 100% disrupt?
Yeah. It's interesting. Thanks for putting me the same with the Pope.
Yeah,
No
sure.
pressure.
Yeah, of course.
I was just reading this book a little while ago, which is interesting, right? Doing Cultural
There you
Anthropology.
go.
So I was just reading this book earlier today. So I think what is interesting is that there are a lot of aspects about the anthropological need to understand culture from a UX experience, even if we're thinking about designer, the experience still requires an end goal, right? And is there satisfaction in the consumer or the person seeking out whatever it is they're looking for and reaching that end goal? And there still is, or gosh, I really hope there has to be the humanistic aspect to understand what motivates someone to go from here to there, right? That AI, it just can't do. At least I don't think it can. They claim AI can have emotion. Again, that's I think what's driven or guided into
Yeah.
whatever's being reported
Well, there
there.
you go. It goes back to your example you were just using, which was tall, black, square-jawed, dual threat quarterback. Because if I'm
Yep.
going to ask, that's what it's going to give me. I have to believe that from a storytelling perspective, anybody who's saying, tell me a story about this consumer who has this goal, they're
Yeah,
going to get the same, there's a homogeneity to what they're going to all receive.
it is human beings who are using the utility provided by AI. And so even whether it's from UX, if it's from a sport media consumer standpoint, how is it going to assist in providing a productive outcome or a helpful outcome to whatever journey that they're seeking, right? So even in the sport world, I think about, and I mean, if we want to talk about an intersection of UX and sport media, I put sports gambling at the top of the list. because the way in which it's interfaced, its liveness, its instantaneity. There we go.
There
We'll
it
use that
is.
word for
Instantaneity.
now. Yeah, to me, that is a fascinating intersection about consumption, user journey, targeted marketing, advertising, trying to figure out what's engaging people to want to continue to come back to do this addictive
Sure.
thing that is sports gambling, because it's a multi-billion-dollar industry now that's being probably a multi-billion-dollar industry that's continuously being tapped into and interfaced more and more into the ESPN app. If we're talking about a particular space, how odds are being promoted, how much sports wagering is influencing the way in which sports storytelling is told. But we're still going back to something that's been part of the newspaper field since the early 1900s, when odds were being published, just like the stock market trade, in the newspapers as a predictive forecast for what might be the outcome.
Yeah.
It's just how quickly that information is accessible. And now you can do live instantaneous betting and every pitch, every play. And so there's this interesting element about AI infusion of data analytics that are immediately through algorithms producing these new lines and odds to place a bet right away.
Think
And
about
there's a
the use.
massive market,
I,
right?
I
That's a massive market.
Without a doubt. And I think about their tools on our side, like Launch Darkly is one that just announced a huge AI. I don't know if it's a feature set or an upgrade where they're really automated. What used to be very manual kind of A/B testing is now automated A, B, C, D, and to your heart's content, come up with as many permutations as you want, and then just let the AI help you inform the decisions of what's going to win. And I think about sports, a sports gambling UX with his hands on something like that. If it's probably they already built it homegrown, to be able to say, look, this interface is winning, or this particular button is winning. And what is the definition of winning? It's more money in our pocketbook. So that button is now green, not blue. And now all that's automated. Did it exist before? Sure. We've been doing that. I've been doing that for 20 years, but now you can do it on such a grander scale. It actually begs the question. I want to move on to something that I also think where I'm starting to see the pendulum swing back, which was in broadcast, there was this one, like a one man band was the norm. One person band was the norm. A single journalist who reported, shot, edited their own stories. I can remember being in journalism school and them handing me a camera and go have fun. And I'm like, I don't know what any of this does. And they're like, it doesn't matter. You're doing it all from soup to nuts. Whether they teach it that way anymore, I don't know. But you lived through that, I would imagine. And what now in the age of AI, it's almost like it's coming back there, where you can be so much more vertically integrated because you have all these assistants, AI assistants, to help you get things done. Is that good? Is that a good thing? Are you seeing it? And is that a good thing?
Great question. Yes, I'm seeing it. So I was the first, as far as I know, I was the first one person band hired in a top 20 market at a Gannett TV station.
Okay.
When I was hired in Tampa. I would generally make the argument then that yes, it can be done by one person, but not every bit of it can be done, right? And you also can't do it to the same quality level of two people working separately and then coming back together to do something, right? I don't think you can. But what's interesting now is there's so much shift in expectation beyond that traditional one person band approach. That was my output goal was solely for what was going to be on the newscast that night, right? That was the end product. That was it. Then as it started integrating more with the web, local TV stations were trying to figure out how to do that. So you need to write a recap story summarizing what it is, hopefully in a different voice or lens than what someone's going to watch on the video package that they're going to watch, that's embedded as a YouTube link in that particular story or whatever interface that they're using. Depending on who's on the ground at the story of the event that's happening, there's a lot more weight put on that individual to produce a diversity of content. And so I think that's where it's become more challenging. So that's where we have digital producers and we have digital editors. The equipment became smaller, right? It became lighter, more mobile. You could do a live broadcast from a phone and not needing a satellite truck. I think the shift in the technology also had a major impact and implication on not necessarily just like reducing the number of people, but it offered the mobility to go live from somewhere that previously never existed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's just a lot of, I don't know, it's a lot. It's a lot going on.
It certainly is. I think our profession's kind of under the way you said is almost near identical. Designers are being asked to write copy, they're being asked to do research, they're being asked to manage stakeholders, build in Figma, understand API integrations and integrations, prompt AI tools, and they have to do it all at once across multiple products and projects. It makes me wonder, is that maturity? Are we actually moving in the right direction? Is it a sign of the industry cutting corners that, hey, look, I can squeeze way more juice out of this than this one person than I was ever able to do before because I'm just going to graciously give them a whole bunch of tokens. It's like the one man band is back, but is it better?
Is it better? No, but it's a sign of the shift of the industry, right? And there's so many industries over the history of humanity, right? Or even just since the Industrial Revolution that you're like, oh, that thing's never going to go away. Like that field went away. So how much can be redeveloped or reshaped over time, I think is the goal for any industry. And is that for the stakeholders to be the decision
Yeah.
makers in that? I think part of the challenge in a capitalistic society is that, yeah, a lot of times those decisions are made with the bottom line in mind.
Yep.
And that's why I think, at least from the broadcast side, you see the cutting of corners because if there still is revenue to be made, and there is, it just may not be in the size of bucket that it once was. How do you still keep the bottom line happy and knowing that your PE ratio is sustainable for investors to still want to invest in these publicly traded companies? I think that's where it becomes an interesting challenge
Yeah.
to think about the longevity of an industry. But that's where I do think what's interesting is live sports still has a draw unlike anything else that's broadcast. It had the aspect of liveness is still so unique, and there still is a market that still wants to advertise and promote and push product through that channel. So the way in which people report about it is certainly reshaping and changing. But until that market gets fully saturated, which when we still see the TV and digital contracts for the NFL
Yeah.
exceeding $30 billion now, if people are willing to pay, there still is a market there in certain ways. I think it's just another avenue where companies are capitalizing on trying to figure out how to tap into that and how to incorporate that into a live broadcast to engage more active audience participation at that point.
Tell me about that interaction has gone beyond just multimedia and it's actually putting audience in as participant more so now than ever. And I think beyond just it's one thing to say it's because you've got a camera framed on Taylor Swift at Kansas City Chiefs games, and so you're bringing in a new. That's true,
Yeah.
but your media is social has turned sports fans into commentators. Anything you mentioned it before, like things before things are broadcast. How did sports journalism's relationship with its audience change? Almost like you can see the audience as a source of information too. It's also weirdly a competitor now. We both live in Florida. We're in Hurricane Alley. We see video sourced about damage that clearly did not get sourced from a journalist, but it got sourced with somebody with at least an iPhone 15 or greater, and it looks just as good. What does that mean from a sports journalism's perspective? Does that change anything?
And it certainly changes. I think it fragments more than anything. To me, that's where the great divide has happened is the fragmentation of sources
Yeah.
is such a high volume right now that I think that is where it dilutes the role of the journalist, right? It used to be you had the team journalist who you knew was the beat writer for
Right.
that particular team. And that person was vetted as a credible news source because they worked for the Washington Post or at the time, the St. Petersburg Times, right? And the magnitude of the St. Pete Times for a long time had such a high level of journalistic integrity, right? But then as merger acquisitions happen and delimiting of the number of journalists, right? the now Tampa Bay Times is a good example about how I think it's a struggle in a local market to still sustain because there's so much other access to information. But I even think back to when I was at the CBS station here in Tampa, and we tried to do citizen journalism and identifying people in communities and say, hey, here's a camera. We need you to document what's going on in your community. That's what we're seeing play out now. It just didn't fit the model or the mold at the time. And you're like, that was just ahead of its time and its thinking, right? Same with live streaming, right? You're like, how did we find this sort of back channel road to do something through YouTube, or even how you and I are communicating right now that previously didn't exist? You had to go into a studio space and rent out the space and have this kind of conversation, and it would be distributed over the air to somewhere. So there still is the audience there, but I think it's the diluting of accurate sources, to me, is where the major concern kicks in. And that's where we get terms like mis and disinformation, because you don't know how and where and through which channels it's circulating. But once it gets in the sphere, it's hard to go back and
No, you
retract and
can't
go,
go.
oh,
Yeah,
sorry, that wasn't real. And you're
no,
like, oh
that's right.
man, whiffed on that one.
I find myself at where I am in my career being an arbiter of standards and conventions more than I am like a true designer. And the reason I say that is because we have our own version of what that you just mentioned, that stratification, where AI tools are letting non-designers be designers. And so you've got product managers, you've got engineers, you've got customer success managers going in and saying, look, I've got access. The commodities, the barrier to entry in all of these design tools is now so low. I can be dangerous enough to go put a simple prototype together. And to be honest with you, the ones that know how to tell a good story do a pretty dang good job, at least enough to get some moment of change in motion in a company. And it used to be that if that had happened 10 years ago, I would have taken, my ego would have been struck. I would have taken offense to it. What are you doing? What are you doing designing? That's my job. And now you look around and go, wait a minute, I don't have enough bodies. I don't have enough designers to begin with. So the fact that you're doing some of this for me is good. And two, AIs can put at least a little bit of perspective or context around things to where you're not going to be completely off the wall in your idea. You're just maybe not going to have the story quite right, or you will not have done the actual qualitative research that I did. Is that happening? And it sounds like to me that's what is going on in the media world today, where it's not about who's getting access to the raw assets, the raw information. It's about the framing. It's about, can you responsibly frame a story?
I think one thing to keep an eye on from the media perspective is the further consolidation of media ownership.
Yeah.
That I think is going to continue to have further implications about what information gets shared. I think there is not to talk politics, but there is a polarization in the media sphere that creates those echo chambers of information, regardless of which path you want to go down, that will continuously reinforce the aspects or the perspectives or the framing of topics, right? And it's why I spend, whenever I'm interested in researching a topic, I intentionally find polarized media spaces to go see how is it being presented, to think about what's my best question to ask, and trying to make understanding about this cultural sphere in which I'm trying to understand a particular topic or aspect that's being reported about. And I think one of the things, even at the graduate level, I try to reinforce in my teaching, is that when a student says, okay, I want this to be my research question, I go, okay, well, what do you already know about that? Because if you're asking a question you already know the answer to, you're not doing research, you're just reinforcing your own understanding of
Yeah,
something.
echo chamber. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If you're asking a research question that's informed to challenge you to dive deep into understanding something, that's when you've landed on a good research question, because you're like, I'm curious about this, or I'm interested to learn more about this. Okay, well, now we have the topic that you want to start exploring and investigating. Tell me what you know, or what you think you know. And then the more that we start to challenge those assumptions, then we can start to go, oh, well, let me see if there's some other interesting element. But I think there's a level of curiosity that has to be innate in the individual to want
Yes.
to seek that out, right? Rather than just go to this thing and go, oh, it's going to tell me the information I need. And then I fall down the echo chamber, and then I'm like, oh, did you see this?
Yeah,
oh, that was fake. You're like, oh, wow, I was bit by the
I
trap
blew it.
again. Right. That's where I think it's really interesting to consider a lot of those elements about. I constantly go back to what's the question I want to ask? What do I already know about it? And then how can I reframe the question to really think about what it is I'm trying to learn or know more about? But not everyone wants to do that. But the more people would be willing to do that, I think it would help us. But I think it would also help whether it's programmers
Yeah,
about the utility of
yeah,
AI. I think about it and how do students use AI for, like we use it for transcription all the time because it helps expedite the process of an interview, of an hour-long interview. But I still need to go back and reread it and listen to it and make sure it's accurate. Because if not, then I'm misrepresenting what they told me because I was too lazy by using an AI transcription software and I took it as gospel.
I have to be respectful of my time and yours. I want to ask you one more question. I ask this of every guest. I'm going to slightly reframe it given the fact that you are in your industry and I am in mine. If you could redesign and use that word, take that word broadly, if you could redesign one thing about how media covers sports, not the technology, not the business model, just the craft itself, the craft of covering sports. If you could redesign one thing, what would it be and why?
If I could change one thing, I think it would be focus less on the win and the loss and the media reporting and focus more on how it happened.
Hmm.
Tell the stories of the implications that come from whatever that is, right? Not necessarily the glorious, momentous recapping of something or the just dejected loss of when, God forbid, Florida State missed another wide right field goal against Miami, right? If we
Yeah,
want to talk about one that would maybe cut to the core for both of those.
sure.
Um, but I think less on the glorification of the wins and losses and more on understanding why sport matters. Because sport has such a social force that is unmatched. Tell more of the stories about why sport matters, I think would be a really interesting element that would help tell and produce really productive stories and not just have people yelling at each other on the screen about why this person won or lost a
Because
battle.
the talking head battle's easy. That's cheap.
The talking head battle is literally just trying to, it's rhetoric and public speaking 101
Yeah,
and try to how to win an argument.
sure.
And it's less about trying to tell a good story. It's really about trying to denigrate someone and win.
I love that. I love that redesign. The only thing that comes close to me, and that you mentioned it earlier, is the Olympics, because no one knows the athlete that well, and and journalists are afforded the time to go do these really amazing deep dives. To be able to do more of that in places I care more about, which is generally football, I think that would be great. I love that one.
Well, and as an aside, after we finish this call, I'm doing an interview with an Olympic journalist about a project that I'm working on to try to understand how journalists covering the Olympics work within some of the boundaries created by the IOC as an
Oh,
entity,
yeah.
right? Okay, so trying to understand how journalists navigate that space, but also in how they interpret sort of the gender dynamic reporting within the context of sport through the Olympics. That's the next research project that I'm working on that I'll be doing that soon.
Wonderful. Travis, thank you for your time. Really fascinating parallels here. We'd welcome you back anytime on UX Evolved. And thank you for closing out season one.
Well, I appreciate letting me be the closer. Hopefully, I didn't cause a big loss. If we want to use a sport analogy, right? Hopefully, I didn't blow it in the bottom of the ninth for you.
No wide rights here.
No.
Thanks,
All right.
Travis.
Well, I appreciate the invite. I'll see you soon.